Hey everyone, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website address is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. There's no Don today. He's out on vacation, but it's me, and we're bringing back one of our most popular guests we've ever had, Anna Marquez. And Anna is from Marquez Clinical Site Partners. We've had her on the show before. It was one of our most popular videos we've ever done, talking about budgeting, what the clinical trial clinics out there can do to improve their cash flow, how to negotiate better, things like that. And the last interview was very long. It was over an hour. This one we're going to try to do like a Cliff Notes version. It's going to be like 15 minutes. We also have questions from some viewers, Anna, for this interview. So I picked out 2 questions that we can answer. And we'll just get started. So how have you been, Anna?
Doing very well, thank you, Dan. And I just want to thank everyone who's been emailing me and contacting me after the interview. I hope that, I was able to shed a little bit of light, So I think if there's one thing that in this industry, you can be certain that there's just so much out there that you don't know. So the education process is just continuous.
Yes.
So it's nice to share.
And these are things you don't hear people talk about, only in like closed meetings where you have to pay for going there. And when we talk about research sites and budgeting and money and things like that, you don't really hear too much about that. So people appreciate whenever we talk candidly about these kind of things.
Yeah, I agree.
So I guess, yeah, I'm sorry, Anna, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's very beneficial. I mean, I think the more that we share on this topic, everybody just benefits from it. So I don't think that this is a topic where you're creating competition between anyone. What's good for one, it's good for everybody else. So
yeah, the way I see it as a research clinic owner, I see that if my colleagues are charging more or they're getting smarter at negotiating their budgets, it will be easier for me to do that because it will be accepted. I will no longer be the exception to the rule. It will be more common. We can start with some viewer questions, okay? I think that's a good way to start, and then we'll kind of just go from there. We had Vivian van der Waal from the Netherlands, who's a sponsor of our show. She asked a question regarding study startups. Okay, you know how there's so many vendors we have to work with, and there's different trainings you have to do before you even start the study. How do you adequately bill for that?
Well, there's different things that you can do. You can, for example, you can charge a fee for electronic data capture. You can try and negotiate a fee for web conferences. It's certainly something that I try to do. You might not get it 100% of the time, but you have to start by asking. And remember what I tell you, they'll always come back the first time and tell you no. So you have to get more specific, write down a paragraph and say, look, it's taking me this number of hours. It's time that my coordinator could be recruiting for another study, recruiting for your study. It is not a cost of doing business because it is specific to your study. So, and you just keep arguing with that. And it's okay to tell a company what's acceptable and what's not acceptable to you. I often say this, I'll say, you know what, I'm sorry, but it's just not acceptable to us. So, and if they really want you, then they'll come back and they'll negotiate with you. Now, I think it's really important to understand that when you're negotiating a budget, you're not going to get everything that you ask for 100% of the time. It's a give and take relationship. So you have to value what for you are things that you cannot let go of. For example, recently I had to negotiate a budget and the sponsor wasn't willing to pay for startup fee. I walked away. If you're not willing to compensate me for startup, there's a huge amount of time that's involved with starting up a clinical trial, then that's not somebody that I want to be, in a business relationship with. I think it has to be fair all the way around.
Is that becoming more common in 2012 for the startup fees to be non-existent or very small?
I hope not. I only came across it this one scenario, and I think it's more specific to that sponsor, and it was a small sponsor. So I don't think that it's something that's spreading. I hope not. That would not be good for us.
Yeah, I'm learning the hard way. I'm doing at one of my clinics. I'm kind of doing most of the study startup, and we didn't negotiate enough in the contracts. So now I'm thinking to invoice the sponsors for the extra time that we did not foresee, because the training is crazy. There's like 10 different vendors per study, and it's wasting a lot of my time. So I think I'm going to be invoicing them.
Yes, and that's one of the things that I think is important to build into the budgets or the clinical trial agreements. Make a note on there that if things change, you ought to have the right to come back and ask for some monies. For example, one of the things that I think we need to be on the lookout for now is the remote monitoring. That's going to become a huge issue. It's being done so that the sponsors and the CROs will save money. So instead of having the monitors come out to your site at every visit, they're going to start to remotely monitor the site. And so that takes a lot of work on our part, because we have to make copies. We have to now send them the documents. We might have to sit in a web conference with them for an hour, 2 hours. I've heard of some of these visits going on for 3 hours. And the PI may have to be involved, the coordinator, and it's very, very costly to the site. So, I always ask now when I negotiate a budget, what's the monitoring plan? If it's on site, then, I don't have an issue, but I make sure that I build a contingency into the clinical trial agreement that if that changes, then we're going to be compensated for that.
I'm glad you brought up remote monitoring, and for those watching, this is not a scripted interview, but I did get a question the other day about remote monitoring, and I haven't experienced it yet, so I kind of dismissed it as, this guy's thinking too far ahead. No one would be interested in this topic, but I'm really glad you brought it up. So you're actually doing some studies with remote monitoring?
Yes, and it's happening very quickly. It's spreading very quickly. So we do need to be aware of it. It's becoming a huge problem and a burden for the sites.
Can you tell us exactly what, or just a little bit about exactly what remote monitoring may mean?
Yeah, I mean, it just replaces the physical presence of the monitor at the site. So instead of the monitor coming and going through the regulatory documents, going through the case report forms, because still a lot of case report forms are in paper version,
right.
Then you, the coordinator, basically has to go through the regulatory binders. They might ask you to fax them the documents, scan the documents to them. So imagine you're basically doing the work of the monitor in terms of pulling the information from the charts, from the reg docs. I mean, that's a huge task. And, they're getting smarter. They're trying to find ways to cut costs. And it's understandable. It's something that we're all trying to do. But, you have to be on the lookout for that, or you're going to get caught having to tackle additional expenses that we can't afford to take on right now. So.
Yeah, it's fine for them to cut costs, but then when we have to pay for those costs, it's not fine.
Right. So make sure you build that into the agreement.
Interesting. I have yet to experience a remote monitoring, but I guess it's, people are experiencing it already. So I'm sorry for dismissing that viewer's question.
No. I mean, I don't think you're the only one, Dan. I just think that it's like you said, this is a topic that we don't talk about too often, the negotiation of trial agreements and budgets. And, that's why this forum, I think, is very helpful to your viewers, because, we can learn from one another tremendously. But one of the things, too, that I'm doing is when they tell me, well, no, there's not going to be any remote monitoring, I ask them to put that into the clinical trial agreement.
Wow.
Because we all know that if it's not documented, then it didn't happen,
right.
And they're going to hold you to that agreement. Even if they tell you an email, well, that's not going to be the case. I ask them, okay, we'll put it in the agreement. So.
Another question related to financing and cash flow is closeout visits. There's some studies that, they may only enroll for a certain amount of time, but then the actual study may take years to complete because they're waiting for every single study participant across the entire world to finish.
Right.
it may be 7 years, right? So this 10% holdback may be held for 7 years.
Yes.
So the viewer's question was, his site is completely done. They've been finished for a long time. He doesn't want to wait 7 years for the rest of the world to finish, because there may be one subject somewhere still doing the study, and he's supposed to do until, who knows when, 2017. This site wants to get their 10% back. Can they request for that?
First of all, they absolutely should request for it because, it doesn't hurt them to ask for it, number one. Number two, the clinical trial agreement should tell you when they're entitled to get that 10%. It'll tell them if it's upon the closeout visit at the site, or is it on everybody being closed out. I mean, they should be able to collect that money already if they've already closed out the site. That's the key, though. Was the site closed out?
Yeah,
The other
I think
thing,
that's his. Sorry to interrupt, but he was telling me that they have not had their closeout visit because the sponsor said they must wait till everyone's finished before they start doing closeouts.
well, unfortunately, it's the way the written agreement went. If that's what the agreement says, that the closeout visit can't take place until the rest of the sites are finished, then that's what you signed for.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's still worth it to have a, sit down conversation and see if you can get that site closed out and collect your money. Now, when you brought up the issue of multiple years, there's something else that came to mind recently that I was talking to another individual who's very well versed in clinical trial agreements. And we were discussing that when you have these protocols that go on year after year after year, most sites don't realize that you can build a inflation into the budget per year. So, for example, if I have a 3-year agreement, the first year, I've got my standard rates. For year 2, I will build in an inflation percentage. Then year 3, I do the same thing. So the fee schedule increases from year to year. It should not be the same fee schedule across all 3, 4, or 5 years.
Right.
So be on the lookout for that.
And typically inflation was what, like 3-4%?
I mean, honestly, I've charged higher.
Okay.
So, but I would say always start a little bit more on the aggressive side because you know that whatever you come up with, they're going to try and cut you down. So, but yeah.
All right.
Build that in.
The last question is from one of our viewers. I can't remember his name, but he was asking. Well, I don't even know if he wants to be identified, so it's good I don't remember his name. But he wants to know if he's negotiating a contract, and he wants to know if there's an agreed upon price or cost, I guess, for each procedure that the sponsors use when they negotiate. And if so, like, how much more can he ask above that?
Well, let me just say that there is a fee schedule, okay, that the sponsors use, and there are industry averages. One of the things that you can do if you are, for example, a private practice, you can look at what the procedure code is. There is a code to everything that we do. You can start by looking at what is the national average for that procedure. What's the national average for a doctor's visit, for an X-ray? That can give you an idea. I'm not saying that's what you should charge, but at the very least, you should not be collecting less than those amounts. Now, every site is different. You have to know what your costs are, what your overhead is. I think there's many sites that forget to build an overhead altogether. And there's other sites that just take whatever overhead the sponsor gives them. Make sure that when you're negotiating overhead, look at what you did last year. What was your true overhead ratio? And apply that, create a policy for that. And, they will abide by that policy if you tell them it's a company policy.
Right.
But going back to the fee schedule, they have databases that the sponsors use, and they pull those averages from there. But what I do, I build my own fee schedule, and I have a spreadsheet that I'm happy to share with anyone. If you email me, I will send that to you. I'll send you the template. but it's a spreadsheet that I use, and every trial that I negotiate, I put in the fee schedule for example, what the informed consent paid me, what the EKG paid me, what the adverse event paid me. And so you will begin to see the trends, and you'll begin to see the averages, and you'll even be able to tell which companies pay higher, which companies pay lower. And I think it really helps you to negotiate your budgets because, it gives you insight as to what the budget should look like. And then you'll know if they're lowballing you.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And then his final follow-up question was, are these costs based upon where you are in geography? Like, I'm sure the coasts have higher overheads, and the sponsors already know that. And then someplace like North Dakota may be a lot less. That's kind of what I told him.
Right, and that's what I've been told by the sponsors, that the fee schedules are different by area. I know it's certainly true in the practice of private medicine. I know, for example, that Medicare does have different fee schedules for different areas of the country. So I believe that that is accurate. So probably a place like New York would probably be more costly for a sponsor than, say North Carolina, perhaps.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you're correct.
All right. Would you like to add anything else, Anna, as we wrap up here? I know you got to run.
No, I, just want to thank everyone. And if you have any questions, just email me. I'm happy to help. And Dan, thank you so much for having me again. And
yeah, anytime. What's your email for everyone out there?
Okay, it's A as in Apple, T as in Tom, M as in Mary, at clinical site, SITE, partners with an S at the end, .com.
Thank you. Email Anna. She's very responsive, very nice. I want to give a shout out to our producers. Everyone who gets a profile on our page also gets to be a producer. So thank you, Sarah Elizabeth Siegler. Thank you, Resolve Research Solutions. Thank you, PTNR, all the way in the Netherlands. Thank you, ECNR, Earthart Clinical Trials, and Accurate Clinical Trials. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Anna, for being a guest on our show.
Thank you again, Dan.
This is Dan from theclinicaltrialsguru.com.